Recently, I saw a documentary that's called Almost Holy. Almost Holy. It came out in 2016, and it tells the story of a man named Gennady, who's a former soldier and boxer, so maybe you can get the physical picture, who's now turned Pentecostal pastor. And he's living in Mariupol, Ukraine, which is his home. Of course, this is before the terrible war that's broken out, but throughout the documentary, you already see that this is kind of coming, you know? But it tells his story of being affected deeply in his heart by seeing so many children and youth who are simply homeless, living on the streets. And he looks around and he tries going through the ordinary means, you know, the local government and different programs, and there's kind of nothing. So he decides that he's going to do something about it. He actually goes on to found the largest home for street kids, and he calls it Pilgrim's Republic. But Gennady will go at night with some of these youth and children who he's already rescued from this terrible darkness, because they know where these kids and youth are to be found. And he goes to rescue them from drug addiction, terrible abuse, and just all the other evils that threaten young people when they're living on the streets. In some ways, it's a really hard documentary to watch. And at certain moments, Gennady has to use, you might say, a little force to extricate them from this life. And what's remarkable is in the documentary, his love can go from being a kind of tough love, the kind my grandma would often tell me about, to a tender love. He has 3 of his own biological children, but he ends up adopting 35 of these children who have been orphaned and he took from the streets, you know. Makes me think of other saints. It was said about St. Francis Cabrini, this short Italian immigrant from Italy, started so much of the Catholic schools here in the United States. The police would say, she'll go to places that we won't. I saw it up close when I was in seminary and I had some time down at Sharing and Caring Hands. I saw this about Mary Jo Copeland. She could be tough. She was not a pushover. And yet in the next moment she could be weeping with empathy when she heard a difficult story that someone was living. And you see for Gennady how there's this interior conviction. I'm called to do this. And if not me, who else? But you can also see that it costs him. The final scene, he likes to swim in the ocean, and the final scene of the movie, he's just kind of collapsed on the beach. And it's kind of symbolic of like being willing to go into darkness, dysfunction, to bring light. It makes me think of a term Pope Francis has used. He said, the mercy of God has the quality of an aggressive tenderness. Ever heard that? Remember hearing that phrase and saying, wait a minute, do those two qualities fit together? The mercy of God has this quality of an aggressive tenderness. And already on this Divine Mercy Sunday, maybe it helps to get us at what mercy really is. Because sometimes we can just assume mercy is being tolerant and nice. Is that all it is? Or is mercy something more? Think of it this way. There's a couple aspects to our present-day culture that's pretty unique, I think. Maybe in the history of civilization, it's hard to tell. But on the one hand, temptation to sin has never been so pervasive. I've had multiple mothers telling me that it's nearly impossible to keep pornography out of the home. It's just one click away. And the bar is so lowered, right? Culture around us is not holding up any mores or values or virtue. And so that's the one hand. And on the other hand, we live in this kind of gotcha world. So that when someone sins, there's almost this kind of instant, irredeemable shame, condemnation, vilification, like cut off from the healthy and the holy, excluded. And you say, wow, that's like whiplash. And maybe this is where mercy as aggressive tenderness comes in. Mercy that's so strong that it's willing to go to those places of darkness and to stand there and be light. To stand there and be love. Not to wash our hands. Mercy is on the move. Mercy is something in God and is meant to be in us that takes the initiative. But then mercy is willing to come alongside someone who feels so beaten up and overwhelmed and bitterly disgusted in themselves and disappointed, and to say, look, His mercies are new every day. Get up, let's go. What's in you is good. The mercy of God is experienced with an aggressive tenderness. On this second Sunday of Easter, this mercy is revealed definitively. And it's revealed by Jesus in the upper room. And notice the very first thing, He goes to them. If you don't think that's extraordinary, think about when someone has disappointed you and let you down and hurt you. Even if you're willing to forgive, often you say, let them come to me. This isn't my responsibility. So you can imagine Jesus, with His legs crossed, just sitting outside the empty tomb like, hey, you come to me. Instead, He goes to them in that deep shame. Yeah, it says the doors are locked for fear of the Jews, but they're just afraid. This is the man who they learned life from. They saw miracles. And they let Him down. The last time we heard from the apostles, with the exception of John, we're told in the Garden of Gethsemane, in the night of His hour, they all fled and forsook Him. Do you remember Peter? He doesn't just deny Jesus. He's literally using curse words for the third person who says, no, you're one of Him. You're with Him. He's so vigorously defending, separating himself from Jesus, that he's cursing. And so this is the first time they see Him. And what a delightful surprise, because what does He say? What the heck? He doesn't say that. Thank you for the laughter from the choir. He doesn't say that. He says, peace be with you. He says it twice. It must have taken their breath away. Like, I don't want you living from your regret. I don't want you living from there. Peace be with you. It's the greatest gift God can give us. Otherwise, we just live from bitterness. We live from resentment. We start keeping score. We carry around these hurts, and they just begin to define us. And Jesus says, peace be with you. I restore intimacy. And then secondly, what does He do? It's so beautiful. He shows them His wounds. On Wednesday, our youth minister was with the 7th graders, and she usually gives about a 2-minute catechesis before the school mass just to transition the children, help them pray the mass. So Deacon John led that, and it was so beautiful. He was telling the children about this little scar on one of his fingers. And he got that scar when he was a child. Up on the Iron Range, he was playing with a buck knife. And he cut himself. And it was bleeding bad. And the thing he remembers initially was he was so afraid of getting in trouble. And so he's trying to keep this blood, and finally he just can't do it. So he has to go to his parents. And his parents just tenderly loved him. So he says, to this day, when I look at that scar, it's just a memory suffused with love. That's the wounds of Jesus. We have to see our wounds in his. Do you know the rest of the day, I can testify to one of these. We no sooner got back in the sacristy, and Mr. Smits, who teaches 5th grade, said to his 5th graders, hang on. He comes running into the sacristy to show Deacon John a scar on his hand. And Deacon John said for the rest of the day, everyone was just showing him their scars, you know? But this is how it works. It's almost like, if you don't trust my peace, here's my wounds. Don't hide. You and I do so often it's just so silly. We just hold up our strength. I mean, even Instagram and all that. You ever put a bad picture of yourself out there just for fun? Just to see if it'll encourage other bad pictures? Like this is where the Lord engages us in vulnerability. His weakness to draw out our weakness. And then thirdly, he does something very beautiful. I know sometimes we just hear the Gospels, we grow up with them, and we're like, of course he breathed on them. Jesus breathing on them? Doesn't that seem a little weird? Unless it's the very same word to evoke the very same activity that God did in Genesis 1 in creating Adam and Eve from the clay. We're told God breathed into them a life-giving spirit. You and I have this immortal soul. We're made in God's image and likeness. We'll never be at rest until we rest in him. And Jesus breathes into the Holy Spirit. Can I just give you the simplest definition of what it is to be a Christian? A Christian Catholic. We have 36 new ones of these here among us at St. Ambrose. To be a Christian is to live by and from and in the Holy Spirit. A sure way of growing fatigued and tired and disappointed is to live from your own strength. We do it all the time. I did it many times this week, self-reliance. And then I'm like, why am I so tired? It's only 2 o'clock. Come, Holy Spirit. Jesus, breathe on me again, the Holy Spirit. Okay, I'm almost done. One last point. We have to address Thomas, right? If his mercy is all those things, you know what else his mercy is? His mercy is even patient in our doubts, in our stubbornness. I have often reflected, can you imagine Thomas for a week going around in that stubbornness of unbelief? Like all the countenances and the joy on the faces of these other apostles. And he's like, no, I'm going to stay in my misery. I'm not happy. He didn't come when I was expecting him. And again, what could Jesus do? Thomas, get over yourself. Thomas, maybe you'll see me when you see me. He comes again. Same room, same peace. He even gives Thomas the great privilege of, Thomas, actually put your doubt, put your very hands in my wounds. Just want to encourage all of us. We all need mercy. I started a spiritual direction appointment with another priest, and it's about monthly. This was earlier this week, and sometimes I never know if he wants to start with confession or not. And so this time I just looked at him with a smile and said, do you want mercy? And he's like, well, you put it that way. Of course I do. We all want it. We all need it. The Lord's heart is brimming to overflowing that we might know this mercy as our healing and as our hope.